On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we always knew that cybersecurity threats were on the rise, but you actually might be surprised the platforms it's targeting and where in the world it's most prominent. Plus, ML is always a hot topic. Curtis is going to go take us through all the things you should be thinking about when it comes to ML for your organization. Digital transformations are a journey, not a destination, and we have a great guest to talk about that. Brendan Caulfield, co-founder of ServerCentral Turing Group, will actually take us through some of the journey and how hot cloud providers are actually providing a much-needed blueprint for your success. It's Wyatt on the set. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to make securing your employees simple and secure. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust. This is Twit.
This is Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 380, recorded February 14th, 2020. Tissue paper security. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Thinking about moving your data storage to the cloud? Wasabi is enterprise-class cloud storage at 1/5 the price of Amazon S3 and faster than the competition with no fees for egress or API requests and no complex storage tiers. Your business may be unpredictable, but your data costs shouldn't be. Start a free trial at wasabi.com and enter the code ENTERPRISE. And by PlexTrack. PlexTrack has finally solved the pain of security assessment reporting. Try PlexTrack free for 1 month, either on-prem or in the cloud, with no contracts or risks. Go to plextrack.com/twit to claim your free month today. And by Melissa. Bad data happens to good companies. That's why 10,000 businesses count on Melissa for clean, reliable address data. Get started today with 25,000 records cleaned for free. That's a $75 value at melissa.com/twit. Welcome to Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your guide through this big, giant world of the enterprise, but I definitely can't guide you by myself. I need to bring in the professionals, the experts in their field, starting with our very own Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu. Cheebert, I think congratulations is in order with you. You have a new award that you guys just got.
Yeah, actually, what's it called? Best of Honolulu 2020 Award for Computers and Technology for the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory.
Well deserved, well deserved. Yeah, congratulations.
This is
you
actually
have a little piece of technology there right now.
This is actually the second award. The first award I got was back in the late 90s. So this little octopus here is 4 Raspberry Pi cameras hung off an ArduCam multiplexer board. And the plan is I'm going to be sticking that into a 4-inch poured acrylic tube and taking those 4 cameras on the perimeter of the tube on the inside and stitching the images together into a 360-degree panorama. And that's going to be taking one picture a minute in the area of a near-shore underwater observatory that we're going to be putting out probably in March. And so that way we can see how things are changing. Yes, Tecduino, those are ribbon cables. You can actually buy them up to a meter and a half long.
There you go. See, now we know why you won an award. Fantastic. Congratulations.
Must have toys, folks, right?
Yeah, you got to have toys. Well, folks, we have not one but 2 experts in their field. We have our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, our senior editor of Dark Reading. Curtis, it's always great to see you. Now, you're gearing up. You're actually gearing up for RSA conference. Is that correct?
I am indeed. RSA is going to be in 2 weeks, and right now there's no danger of it being canceled. Another big conference being held at the same time, Mobile World Congress, has decided to put a halt on the proceedings for this year, but RSA is forging ahead, and I'm looking forward to seeing a bunch of folks there. I've already gotten pinged by a couple of members of the Twiat Riot, looking forward to seeing them in person. And between now and then, I've got a bunch of great articles coming up over at Dark Reading.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, guys, for being here. We've had a really busy enterprise week. We always knew that cybersecurity threats were on the rise, but you actually might be surprised at the platforms it's targeting and the locations it's actually reaching. We talk about that today. Also, ML is always a hot topic, especially since we don't really understand the risks and rewards with it. Chris is actually going to take us through some of the things you should be thinking about when it comes to ML. Plus, we have a great guest, Brendan Caulfield, co-founder of ServerCentral Turing Group, to take us through the journey of digital transformation, how cloud providers might provide a much-needed blueprint for your success. But before we get into all that goodness, we do have to go through this week's blips. Now, in 2020, it's evident that malware might eventually overtake your mobile device, so you actually should be ready for that. Most people actually store their contacts, files, and data in a secure cloud storage layer. So if the device is actually compromised, you can just reset it, right? Well, now factory resets normally clear data and memory caches, removing that potential threat on the device. Unfortunately, that used to be true, but not anymore. A widely circulating piece of Android malware, primarily targeting US-based phones, uses a clever trick to actually reinfect one of its targets that truly stumped researchers, and how they actually did that was actually really interesting. In fact, it was there still after a factory reset. Now, dubbed X-Helper, the malware was actually introduced back in May 2019 when a research firm published a brief profile. Now, 3 months later, the firm provided a deep analysis after the company's Android antivirus app detected X-Helper on 33,000 devices, mostly located in the US. This is actually making it one of the top Android threats. Now, because of the encryption and heavy obfuscation it actually made it hard to analyze the threat, but researchers ultimately concluded that the main purpose of the malware was to act as a backdoor that could remotely receive commands and install other apps. However, there's a new information coming to light here by researchers saying that even a factory reset or a flash did not rid the device of malware. What was the source of the reinfection, you may ask? Well, the Google Play Store, of course. It was finally identified that the source of the reinfection was that it was using several folders on the phone that contained files that, when executed, installed X-Helper. Now, all the folders began with this string called com.mufc. Now, to the researchers' surprise, these folders weren't removed, even though the user performed a factory reset of the device. Now, hidden inside the directory named com.mufc.umbtts was an Android application package, or APK, that dropped X-Helper variant. Now, the variant, in turn, dropped more malware within seconds. Now, X-Helper variant installed the folders and made them appear as an SD card, and it wasn't affected by the factory reset. Now, even though users reported that they actually didn't have an SD card on their device. Now, you may be wondering, well, how can I get rid of this thing myself if I'm infected? Well, the easiest way is to use File Manager in the Android device to delete the MUFC folders and all the contents, factory reset, and then bam, it's gone. Now, simple to get rid of, but hard to discover it might just be the technique and theme of malware in 2020.
Well, the FBI says business email compromise cost business $1.7 billion in 2019. The FBI says that in the last year, BECs, business email compromises, cost an estimated $1.77 billion in business losses and resulted in a total of 23,775 complaints to the FBI. This week, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, released its 2019 Internet Crime Report, which digs into cybercrime trends throughout the year. In 2019, the IC3 received 467,361 complaints, which cost organizations a total of $3.5 billion, up from $2.7 billion in 2018. The most frequent complaints relate to phishing and similar attacks, non-payment or non-delivery scams, and extortion, FBI officials say. But the most expensive complaints are related to BEC, romance or confidence fraud, or copying the account of a person or vendor to collect personal or financial data about a victim familiar with them. In 2019, IC3 saw an increase in BEC complaints related to the diversion of payroll sums. Attackers send a fake email to a human resources or payroll department requesting an update to a specific employee's direct deposit information. In addition, gift card attacks are especially popular toward the year's end and the big holiday season. In the fourth quarter of 2019, those gift card attacks made up 62% of all BEC attacks. Now, a variety of new techniques are helping attackers bypass security tools and launch successful ransomware campaigns. They target non-email applications like Slack, WhatsApp, and Teams, as well as existing vulnerabilities in antivirus products. Attackers are now increasingly known to use fileless malware designed to slip past endpoint security agents. In all their forms, user devices have a huge code base for attackers to target, including operating system code and the growing but ever popular middleware.
The headline is, the U.S. says it can prove Huawei has a backdoor access to mobile phone networks. The article goes on to say, U.S. officials say they have evidence that Huawei has backdoor access to mobile phone networks around the world, according to a Wall Street Journal published the other day. Quote, we have evidence that Huawei has the capability secretly to access sensitive and personal information in systems it maintains and sells around the world, spoken by the U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien in that article. The United States has long claimed that Huawei can secretly access networks through the networking gear it sells to telcos, but the government previously argued that it doesn't need to show any proof. U.S. officials still are not providing such evidence publicly, but have begun sharing their intelligence with other countries. The journal article wrote, the U.S. kept the intelligence highly classified until late last year when American officials provided details to allies, including the UK and Germany, according to officials from the three countries. That was a tactical turnabout for the U.S., which in the past has argued that it didn't need to produce hard evidence of the threat it says Huawei poses to nation security. Now, to put this in perspective, there are backdoors specifically designed for law enforcement. Telecom equipment makers who sell products to carriers, quote, are required by law to build into their hardware ways for authorities to access the networks for lawful purposes. But they are also required to build equipment in such a way that the manufacturer can't get access without the consent of the network operator, according to the same journal article. So, dude, let's just say that I have seen this in person on Huawei equipment, and while I have had conversations with law enforcement about this, I am bound by an NDA from disclosing the details publicly.
Well, the coronavirus is raising new business continuity and phishing challenges for InfoSec. Cyber attackers are barraging business with phishing lures touting fake info about the coronavirus. And although the lures may be fake, the security and business continuity threats that some IT departments are preparing for are quite real. One big question, if workers are sequestered in physical quarantine zones, will IT and SecOps be able to continue? The risk is more prevalent as the IT supply chain becomes more global and organizations rely on overseas IT services from help desk to 24/7 SOC or Security Operations Center as a service. The concern is not just that workers themselves may get infected by the virus. The concern is that employees, contractors, and service providers workers who are not infected could nevertheless be quarantined for being in physical proximity to the infected individual. American clients are beginning to consider the secondary impact they may feel if the virus further expands in, for example, India, which is a source of so many IT services. IT security departments, already short-staffed, could be stressed even further than most other teams. And that's something about the coronavirus that cyber attackers will surely capitalize on, as they unfortunately already are. Cybersecurity companies have been spilling over with detections and reports of phishing messages that use coronavirus-related lures. The messages include malicious links and attachments and download a variety of malware, from Emotet to wipers to remote access Trojans.
In case you've been under a rock, there was an announcement. Mobile World Congress for 2020 in Barcelona has been canceled due to concerns about the coronavirus. The threat of coronavirus has killed the Mobile World Congress 2020 gathering in Barcelona, the world's largest mobile technology conference. In a terse statement to prospective exhibitors, attendees, and the host nation of Spain, John Hoffman, CEO of the GSMA, which has been hosting Mobile World Congress in Barcelona annually since 2006, wrote that the gathering has now been canceled after weeks of effort that were meant to increase safety for the attendees. Quote, since the first edition of Mobile World Congress in Barcelona in 2006, the GSMA has convened the industry, governments, ministers, policymakers, operators, and industry leaders across the broader ecosystem. With due regard to the safe and healthy environment in Barcelona and the host country today, the GSMA has canceled Mobile World Congress Barcelona 2020 because the global concern regarding the coronavirus outbreak, travel concern, and other circumstances make it impossible for the GSMA to hold the event. So, Padre, sorry, no Barcelona trip for Mobile World Congress this year.
Being a huge fan of materials science, especially since my dad is a chemist and a materials inventor. Happy birthday, Dad. Now, when I hear about new cool discoveries of materials, I have to report them to all of you. Now, you've all probably heard of materials being stronger than steel, but how about 200 times stronger? That's right. Graphene has been dubbed the material of the future for its unbelievable strength and the myriad of potential applications it offers. And European researchers have just released the first ever manual on how to produce it. Now, graphene is a layer of carbon atoms obtained from graphite, which can be found, for example, in the tip of a pencil. Now, arranged in a honeycomb-like pattern, it's 200 times stronger than steel, harder than diamond, and carries both heat and electricity better than any other material, including gold or copper. And it's also 1,000,000 times smaller than a strand of hair. And the material's flexibility and resilience means it can be used in a variety of industries such as aeronautics, space exploration, medicine, energy, or electronics. Now, one of the other projects will develop the state-of-the-art vision sensors, which could be critical for the safe functioning of self-driving cars, while another will be used as a graphene-based filter to remove contaminants such as pesticides and dangerous pathogens from drinking water. Now, what does it mean for the industry? Well, it means that devices and vehicles have a future of being stronger, lighter, and more stable than years before, and it means that microelectronics might have a new material to advance their miniaturization. That means look out in the near future for graphene-based mobile devices near you. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get there, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Now, having developed a ton of projects on Wasabi Cloud Storage, I can tell you that they have some really unique features that you're going to really want and want to try out right away. You might be thinking, I use cloud storage, and the more I store in it, or the more I access it, and the more operations I perform on it, the more I get charged. Well, in this day and age, that is the story for most of the cloud storage companies out there. Most of them compete to see how low they can go on those ingress and egress fees, but Wasabi has a solution for all of this. Now, from my experience, I can tell you, if you try to go cheaper on some cloud storage systems, you also give up on performance and reliability. Well, Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage has a way to fix all of these things, from small personal projects all the way up to enterprise ones. Wasabi has figured it all out. Now, let's talk about the cost really quick. Listen to this cost. Pricing is just $5.99 per terabyte per month. Now, that is super competitive. Plus, listen to this game changer. Unlimited free egress for your data. That means no charging for API calls, so you don't actually pay to actually access your data. Now, I can tell you that not having to include those egress fees and those API calls for CRUD operations will substantially save you money on the cost of doing business. Now, you're probably thinking, well, if they're cheaper, they must be slower, or they don't have all the bells and whistles, right? Well, with Wasabi, they'd be able to tackle all of these areas. Wasabi has developed some disruptive technology. They've actually found ways to pull raw performance out of their storage devices without compromising anything. They have a revolutionary process that lays data on disks sequentially, as opposed to blocks. And what happens when they do that? Well, that means Wasabi's storage is 80% cheaper and 6 times faster than the industry leaders out there. Now, are you and your organization worried about compliance? Well, Wasabi is HIPAA, FINRA, and CIHS compliant as well. Not only does Wasabi offer fast, inexpensive storage, but there's also a bunch of other features not talked about by other storage providers that Wasabi provides out of the box. In fact, they have enhanced security being one of them. Wasabi follows industry best security models and design practices. Wasabi offers a unique feature called immutable buckets of data that cannot be deleted or altered, which actually protects your valuable data from accidental malicious destruction. Now, with these buckets, they have access control mechanisms such as bucket policies and access control lists, which can be used selectively to grant permissions. Not only that, but they also have 90-day rotating integrity checks, and they provide 11 nines. That's right, 11 nines of durability. That means on average, you'll lose one file every 649,000 years. Now, according to the industry-leading market research firm Gartner, by 2025, 80% of enterprises will have shut down their traditional data centers versus 10% today. Wasabi is going to ease that transition and help you feel comfortable and confident in moving to the cloud. Now, data storage is all Wasabi does. They are the experts. It's their passion. They believe in the world of rapidly escalating cloud storage needs. Things only move forward if cloud storage is treated more like a utility with fast, affordable storage available in endless supply. I bet you want to try this right now. Go build something fun or move some of your data right now. Calculate the savings for yourself and start a free trial, unlimited storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click the free trial link, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. Join the movement and migrate your data to the cloud with confidence. Go to wasabi.com and make sure you use the offer code ENTERPRISE. And we thank Wasabi for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, let's go ahead and jump into the bites. Now, remember the old days when Windows PCs were the ones that you really had to worry about infecting with malware? Well, those were the good old days, and those days are now over. Now, 2019 was the year of diversification of not only investments, but of sophistication of hacking, evasion, and stealth techniques as well. Now, several companies have put out reports seeing similar results, but this is one was actually put out by Malwarebytes around threat detection. Now, let's go through some key takeaways, and I want to bring my co-hosts in to get their thoughts on this. First thing being, there was actually a 13% increase in the amount of threat detection for businesses. And there was actually a 1% decrease from consumer, which is interesting. Now, in addition to business seeing an increase, the threats are more sophisticated, many using exploits, credential stealing tools, and multi-stage attacks involving mass infections of a target. While 7 of 10 top consumer threat categories decreased in volume, hack tools increased against consumers by 42% year over year, bolstered by families such as the Mimikatz, which is actually targeting businesses as well. Now, organizations were once hammered with the Emotet and TrickBot in 2019, 2 Trojan families that started out as simple banker info stealers, then evolved into downloaders and botnets. Now, we've also talked a lot about ransomware and how it's going to actually increase in 2020. However, the funny thing here is, according to the report, is ransomware detections have slightly declined from 2018 into 2019. However, this might be due to lower rate of WannaCry detections left over from 2017. Now, net new ransomware activity against organizations still remains high because ransomware families such as the Ryak, Phobos, and the Sodinokabe, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a really bad name for ransomware, but either way, also known as Revel, making waves against cities, schools, and hospitals. In fact, Ryak detections increased by 543% over Q4 in 2018. And also the Sodinokabe or rival one has actually increased 820%. It's a lot. Now, adware aggressiveness has also increased in 2019, approximately 24 million Windows adware detections and 30 million Mac detections. That's right, 30 million. The top 3 consumer threat detections belonged to adware families, and the number 1 business detection was also adware. Now, the number 1 Mac detection and adware family was called NewTab. Now, that brought in 28 million detections just by itself. Now, Mac threats are also on the rise here, and they have actually taken the front row seat in infections and threats with a 400% increase in 2019. That's right. just remember, your Mac is no longer safe here. Now, in fact, it's detected on average of 11 threats per Mac endpoint, nearly double the average of 5.8 threats on a Windows device. Very interesting. Now, where in the world is malware being detected? Well, of course, anywhere around the world, but North America was responsible for 48% of those detections. EMEA being in the second place with 26%, and LATAM and Asia coming in around 12 and 14%. And of course, some of the other interesting parts here is that the most threats in the world at 24 million threats is actually North America, up 10% since 2018. But LATAM takes that seat with the most growth of up 7.2 million detection threats, and an increase of 26%. Now, there's an interesting thing here because adware is one of those things that has been kind of on the rise. Remember Microsoft's movement from Edge to the Chromium-based Edge. The web threats on that front actually shift browser developers to rely more on the Chromium platforms, showed an increase of new exploits against today and tomorrow's browser applications, and not just from the aging, dwindling Internet Explorer. Now, meanwhile, web skimmer activity is also on the high, with groups like MageCart or MageCart aggressively modifying payment process sites to steal financial information. So there's a lot of focus here and a lot of increase. We thought that in some areas it would be more increased than others. But I do want to throw this over to my co-host because some of the interesting facts here, I want to start with you, Chee. We saw an increase in enterprise focus. But an interesting part is consumers were actually down 2%, not 1%, as I said, but businesses were up 13%. What do you think the reason is for the decrease there on the consumer side?
I think it's follow the money. Ransomware for consumers gets you not a whole lot. Ransomware for businesses is where the money's at. So I'd say follow the money.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Curtis, I want to throw this to you because last year was kind of like the year of ransomware, right? We saw a ton of increase of tons of ransomware. But in this report, it's actually saying in some cases, we've actually seen a decrease in detection here. What gives, you think?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is a number of groups deciding to more carefully target their attacks. What we are not seeing so much are the big scattershot ransomware attacks. What we are seeing are targeted attacks against organizations like small to mid-sized municipalities, healthcare organizations, educational institutions, and in at least one case, the U.S. Coast Guard. So what they're doing is targeting organizations that have critical infrastructure, a critical need to have data available quickly, and they're doing it with ransom demands that are large but not eye-watering. So what they're trying very hard to do is come in just around the insurance limits of a lot of these organizations, have the organization like a municipality decide that it is far cheaper to have their insurance company pay up and get their data back than it is to go through to the effort of decrypting and possibly not decrypting the files themselves. What is unstated in so many of these cases is that the cheapest option still would be simply to have great backup. But, that's asking a lot, almost asking as much as getting employees not to randomly click on every stray attachment that comes in from an unknown source via email.
I can tell you that is very hard to do, very hard to do. Chee, I want to throw this over to you because we talked a little bit about botnets are actually on the rise. And don't you think this was kind of projected, though, because of the fact that they just have a greater scale and return on investment here when it comes to hackers?
No, dude, botnets are horrible. Problem is, we've got all these companies that are putting out small devices, IoT devices, and they're still using really old versions of Linux. They're still not doing a good job of securing their devices, and the consumers are strictly buying on price. They're not going for devices that are actually secure. Sorry, people, you get what you pay for. So there's a reason why I use high-end commercial cameras in my home. There's a reason why I have an enterprise-grade firewall in my home. If you're going to buy cheap, you're going to leave more attack surface for bots. And so I'm sorry, bot traffic, bot attacks are just going to keep increasing because people keep buying really cheap devices that have security like tissue paper.
That's true. That is true. Security like tissue paper. I think we have a show title there. But one thing that's interesting here that I saw was on the increase is the fact that adware was actually on the increase. And that the interesting thing about that is we know that obviously Google, a lot of these other companies, Google, Facebook, they focus on ads to be able to make their money. And so they have these platforms, especially in the browser, that allow them to collect that data and collect that money, both from users and from advertisers. So I'm not surprised that these types of things are actually being exploited and supported on, because it's supported on every platform, whether it's Linux, Windows, Mac, and again, they're just easily exploited because they're being used by the big dogs anyways. So we'll have to see what's going to happen there and how we're going to be better protected, whether it's browser extensions or OS supported things, but we'll have to see. Well, folks, that does it for that bite. I do want to throw it to Curtis because there are some things that you really should be thinking about when it comes to ML, and organizations need to know what those are. So, Curtis, I want to throw that to you.
Thanks, Lou. It is important because a growing number of companies and their applications are making use of some sort of machine intelligence, whether it is machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, call it what you will. And yes, before you send me an email, I know that there are differences between all of these, but they all do have to do with machines that learn. And an organization, the Berryville Institute of Machine Learning, has developed a formal risk framework that can help developers understand the security of future multiple machine language systems. BIML's architectural risk analysis of ML systems is different from some of the earlier work done in the area because it focuses on issues that engineers and developers need to be paying attention to at the outset when they're designing and building these machine learning systems. Most of the previous work on securing machine learning systems is focused on how to best protect operational systems and data against particular threats, and not on how to design them to be secure in the first place. Now, this work provides a very solid technical foundation for taking a look at the risks associated with ML, says Gary McGraw, who is a noted security researcher and the co-founder of BMIL. And the need to this kind of a risk analysis is critical because very few people are paying attention to it. This analysis considers 9 different components that they've identified as common to setting up, training, and deploying a typical ML system. And these include things like raw data and the data set assembly, the training model, the inference algorithm, and the outputs. They ranked them and assigned multiple risks and data analysis matrices, coming up with scores for each of these that people can use. And in total, their architectural analysis showed that the typical machine learning systems are exposed to as many as 78 specific security risks across all the individual components. Now, the researchers say that the whole analysis thing is about identifying and discussing machine learning risk and discussing them, not necessarily fixing them immediately, but identifying them. Because once you know what the risks are, it's much easier to design around them. Lou, I'm interested because of what you do. Is machine learning something that you are hearing about or that you're involved with on a regular basis, or is this still way out there in the realm of sort of speculative fiction for people down in the trenches of application development?
We're always in the trenches of application development, but I think that ML is a real thing. I think that we're constantly, whether it's data teams, obviously inside of Microsoft and other organizations I work with, they have their own data teams. They're either building their own ML models to analyze data or features that are being built into applications that are providing really good insights into options. Like, for instance, you can probably open up PowerPoint today and start creating a slide, put a bunch of photos and some information in it, and then there's a nice little button on the ribbon there that says design. If you click that, it actually goes to the cloud, it goes through a model and actually generates different designs for you based off of a bunch of ML models. So that's super interesting. And there'll be more and more features like that, whether it's coming from Microsoft or other companies around the world, that will be able to produce these things and really show and add value to your experience. Now, can that go wrong? Obviously, yes. I mean, you have to take precaution here on not only what data you're feeding in and what data you're coming out, but also just the validity of the models. And that's coming obviously with training the data and making sure that you handle all the different points. But I've seen systems where, like for instance, things like license plate detection systems or something like that. There's easy ways for people to trick those systems, and so these models are not super bulletproof. So there are ways to have problems with these systems, and I think organizations have to be really careful what they're trusting and making sure that they're doing the right thing when it comes to the validity of them.
Yeah, we've seen some famous examples of things like people convincing a machine learning system that a stop sign is a ham sandwich or something like that. Right. My question to you is, Lou, are you seeing any evidence of some strong best practices in how to design security into these systems? I know that for basic application development, there are some well-known guidelines, frameworks, best practices for how you design efficient, effective code. Have you run across anything at all like that when it comes to designing intelligence into an application?
Yeah, I think, I'm not an expert here, but I do know that I've seen some organizations that I work with, especially in Silicon Valley area, that have, whether they're startups or whatnot, that do have developed some best practices. Some of them being that, hey, the more you can do on the edge and, like for instance, on the client without having to send the data anywhere is actually better, because then you can do and run these models on the devices themselves and not actually have to send the data up anywhere and transmit the data. So this way you have to worry less about encryption and in transit and all that stuff. And plus, you have to worry less about, hey, where the data is going and is that place compliant and so on and so forth. So I would say that's one of the biggest ones. The more you can do on the edge, on edge computing, the better. Obviously, wherever you're sending the data needs to be compliant or should be compliant. It also needs to be efficient in a way where it can produce and handle a lot of traffic, so you're not capable of doing DNS attacks against it. But again, there's just lots of little things out there. Again, I'm not an expert. I would definitely go check out. There are some really good guys that are coming out, especially from some of the big companies out there that are doing a bunch of ML, as well as some of the startups that are coming out of Silicon Valley.
Well, lots to learn, lots of places to learn it. I know we're going to be covering this in the future, but in the meantime, it's good to know that some people are at least thinking about the steps you need to go through in order to design security in, rather than trying to simply bolt security on to cover up for the inherent flaws. Well, that's it for this bite. Lou, I'm going to pass it back to you to take us ever closer to that great guest we have coming up here on This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thank you, Curtis. That's right. Before we get to our guest to drop some knowledge on the Twilight Riot, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is PlexTrack. Now, when it comes to security assessments, I think we can all agree reporting stinks. That's right. PlexTrack founder Dan DeClaus is a 15-year veteran of cybersecurity. He holds both a CISSP and an OSCP license. And what he found when spending most of his time on application penetration testing was it actually not that easy to do. So Dan actually decided to build his own solution called PlexTrack. Now, PlexTrack has since raised venture capital, employs over a dozen employees, and boasts Fortune 500 companies as clients. Now, what can PlexTrack do for you and your organization? Well, PlexTrack is the purple teaming platform that provides a rapid reporting for both red teams, as well as tracking, remediation, and attestation for blue teams as well. Now, bring those two security teams together without the need to actually physically sit together. That's right. Through a central interface, PlexTrack gives red teams the ability to report issues, and blue teams are actually able to remediate them. Now, red teams can actually import findings from numerous scanners, They can include screenshots and videos with auto formatting. They can also customize Word and PDF formats with current templates, and they can streamline reviews with intuitive web-based readouts. Now, blue teams can actually customize internal and external assessment questionnaires. They can also synchronize findings with task management tools like integration with Jira Cloud. They can assign findings to team members and track status over time. Plus, they can provide attestation and security posture with robust analytics. Now, PlexTrack improves the entire security engagement lifecycle by making it easy to generate security reports, deliver them securely, and track the issues to completion straight from the platform. Now, PlexTrack is the solution for enabling the purple teaming process, and it can be launched in just 10 minutes. Now, try PlexTrack free for 1 month, either on-prem or in the cloud, with no contracts or risks. Simply go to plextrack.com/twit to claim your free month. That's plextrack.com/twit. And we thank PlexTrack for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's my favorite time of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the Twilight Riot. Today we have Brendan Caulfield, co-founder at ServerCentral Turing Group. Welcome to the show, Brendan.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
We're doing wonderful. Now, Brendan, our audience loves to hear people's origin stories. Can you maybe just take us through a journey through tech and how you ended up at ServerCentral Turing Group?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So, and I'll try to keep it brief because I can definitely find myself on a soapbox here. But
no problem.
So, obviously, ServerCentral Turing Group, as you can see by the name, is really the combination of two companies. ServerCentral is a very traditional data center co-location and managed services company, network services company, been around since 2000. Turing Group was a company I founded in 2013 with a co-founder, Eric Danowski, really focused on providing services around the public cloud platforms, namely AWS, or primarily AWS at the time. ServerCentral is also a firm that we've had a very long relationship. When I was in enterprise IT, we had contracts with them for co-location and stuff like that. So within the last couple of years, we realized, wow, we can really take sort of the core competencies of both business, on the ServerCentral side with the core data center stuff, and the Turing Group side on the public cloud stuff, and we can put these things together and create this really compelling offering that most enterprises, and I shouldn't even say enterprises, small business up to the enterprise, they're really looking for solutions in that hybrid space, right? Like some things are great in the public cloud, some things are great in the data center. So we kind of join these companies to be able to sort of put the right combination of public cloud, private cloud, and co-location together to really fit the needs of more and more businesses as they're sort of embarking on these transformations.
Now, let's talk a little bit about transformation, because we talk a lot about digital transformation here. But one of the challenges we see from a lot of people, a lot of organizations, is that they start piecemealing or a la carte, put services together to be able to move from the kind of the on-premise world to the hybrid or to the online. And a lot of times that creates a lot of issues, especially from operations standpoint, or even, combining IT and operations. And so they run into these issues. Can you maybe just take us through the landscape of what you're seeing organizations are running into and how they're trying to solve them today?
Yeah, I think, the piecemeal approach to transformation and moving stuff out of sort of more traditional, whether it be on premises or managed co-location providers into a public cloud, the piecemeal approach is not bad. In fact, in most cases, I would probably recommend, at least at the beginning, some sort of move a workload, test it out, get familiar, move some more, and maybe at some point in the future, you do some sort of massive move. What can't be piecemealed, and what we see, and probably what I see is the biggest gap in successful transformations is you can't piecemeal the strategy, right? I'm not 24 anymore, though I have my cool headphones on, so maybe I look 24. But we used to run into these things and really want to play with technology. This is not a scenario where you want to rush, right? You need to take the time to define your strategy, your KPIs, and your goals to really have a solid foundation for any transformation. So piecemeal is fine in certain aspects of transformation. Moving workload by workload is not such a bad strategy, but skipping the sort of overarching strategy component, which unfortunately we see a lot, right? A lot of people are like, hey, I'm just going to move this one workload and we're going to check it out and see how it goes. And then all of a sudden that one workload turns into two workloads, or maybe it was a dev or a stage environment that worked out really well, and now it's a production environment, and you don't have the sort of underlying strategy or governance or models in place to handle this. And what we see is once people take that first step into the public cloud, they want more of that, right? And that's when things kind of can spiral a little bit out of control.
Right, makes sense. I think the interesting thing here is we see a lot of organizations there, they're saying, hey, we do want to digitally transform, we do want to move to the cloud, but we're having some second thoughts. Can you maybe just take us through some of the kind of resistance that some of the organizations are having, or what some of the friction they're having to moving to the cloud?
I think, this transformation, this digital cloud transformation, which is probably a slightly overused term, it's a big change, right? I actually struggle. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years at this point, and I'm struggling to find another example of this much disruption, right? So I think there's a bit of a concern about control. People start sort of talking about public cloud, and we've crossed a lot of bridges in the last 5 years where people used to be concerned, and I still think there is some concern, but we're not as concerned about security and not being able to touch our servers and stuff like that we used to. But I think that there's still significant control concerns about who has access and who has knowledge, and I think most of those concerns are just rooted in the fact that the model of how we handle compute and technology within our businesses has changed so much that it's taking time for all the stakeholders to evolve, right? And this is not just an IT issue anymore, right? And if you treat it like that, that's where we see the biggest problems, right? This is a business transformation much more than just a technology transformation. So I think what's happening there is you may be a technologist and you're running into the public cloud and you may feel very, very comfortable, but maybe your finance department doesn't, maybe your legal department, maybe it breaks governance models and security models that are long held. And so I think that control and that understanding, CIOs and technology people need to make sure that their colleagues throughout the company are comfortable with the operating plan when it comes to public cloud, so that you're not running into those roadblocks down the road.
Makes sense. So one of the interesting things that we've seen is obviously a lot of people moving to digital transformation. They're moving all of their data and their services and their workloads to the cloud, but they're choosing specific cloud providers. Now, I think you guys focus a little bit more on AWS. The question to you is the challenges the same if you were to go, let's say, AWS versus Google's cloud platforms or Azure?
It's funny. I say this a lot. I don't mean to belittle some of the complexity of the public cloud, but to me, I don't think the particular provider really adds that much to the complexity. I mean, there's certainly nuanced differences and stuff like that, but I always like to say that this is not really a technology problem, right? So, to that end, I think I don't think one particular provider over the other increases or decreases complexity or probability of success by any means. I think the more providers you add into your ecosystem, right? Like if you've embraced this multi-cloud platform where, hey, Google's a great, sort of analytics engine. I'm going to use them for that. And AWS has got this great database as a service technology. If you start to jam them all together into one sort of cohesive computing environment, I do think that increases complexity quite a bit. The models are different. The way that they charge is different. So, and the skill sets are different, right? So you're all of a sudden not having to hire experts in AWS. You're having to hire experts in Google. You're having to hire experts in AWS. And so I think the multi-cloud thing, where when executed correctly, can be super powerful. It certainly adds complexity, and you need to understand that and be prepared for it.
Makes sense. Well, when we come back, we do want to talk a little bit more about the transformation for businesses, as well as we get a little bit into the reInvent conference as well, because there's some really interesting things that were debuted there that you guys have been talking about. And also want to bring my co-host back in. But before we get to all that, we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Melissa. Now, every address is covered with Melissa. They are literally the leader in address verification. Their addresses are covered from Adelaide, Australia, all the way to Zipaquirá, Colombia, and everywhere in between. Having run numerous businesses and ones that depend on data, I can tell you that there's nothing good about bad data. Nothing good. Not only does it cost money, but it hurts sales, decreases customer satisfaction. It can really, really, really hurt a business. Now, if bad addresses, duplicate records, and bouncing emails are hurting your business, isn't it time to come clean with Melissa? Now, if you don't want to take my word for it, check out these companies. Delta Faucet, Z1 Motorsports, and Car2Go actually use Melissa. In fact, Delta Faucet was able to improve their call center process, but with global address auto-completion. In fact, Melissa was able to reduce the fraudulent e-commerce transactions for Z1 Motorsports by 90%. That's amazing. Now, Melissa provides a full spectrum of data quality protection for your customer data. They verify postal addresses, mobile numbers, and email addresses. Update the addresses of customers that have moved and eliminate duplicate records. Gain additional customer insight into your data with Melissa's analytics. Easily build address verification and customer data validation into your custom applications using Melissa's APIs, CRM Cloud connectors, and e-commerce plugins, or upload your customer file for a quick data cleanse. Melissa is serious about securely managing your data. They continually undergo independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. They are SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliant. Mailers spend about $20 billion annually in undeliverable mail. Don't lose customers or cash. Make every address count. Bad data happens to good companies. That's why 10,000 organizations worldwide trust Melissa to get their customer data clean and accurate. Get started today with 25,000 records cleaned for free. That's a $75 value at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit, or call 1-800-MELISSA to find out more. And we thank Melissa for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, we've been talking with Brendan Caulfield, co-founder and ServerCentral Turing Group, about digital transformation. Brendan, I do want to bring my co-host back in, but before we do, I want to get into a quick topic about reInvent. I know reInvent is AWS's big conference for the year, and there were some pretty interesting things announced there that can help organizations. Can you maybe take us through a couple of those and what it means for digital transformation?
Sure. It's interesting. I've been going to reInvent for I think the last 7 years now, and for anybody that hasn't been there, I highly recommend it, because it's grown so much. It's actually something that you kind of need to experience at least once. It's so massive, and there's so much going on. It's a lot of fun, but it's not something you run into, right? You really do have to have a plan if you're going to make the best use of your time and resources out there. But what I found interesting this year in particular, particularly as I was watching, some of the big keynotes by, Jassy and Werner Vogels, is I felt like the tone the tone and the tenor were a little bit different this year. reInvent is by all standards, it's this great big event. It's a big party. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and they always have a ton of great announcements that are super exciting. And at some point during the following year, those things are going to roll out and become generally available. What I found interesting about this year, even though there was some really interesting, innovative things, particularly some of the stuff they're working on with Verizon on the 5G edge stuff and trying to bring compute closer to the user. I found all that interesting. But what I actually thought was most interesting this year was I felt like there was a recognition by AWS leadership that I hadn't seen in the past, that felt a little bit to me like they were taking the ecosystem and the competition a little bit more seriously. Like, no longer were the competitors like distant objects in the rearview mirror, but they're realizing that platforms like Azure and Google are perfectly viable and making a lot of great headway in the market. So what I thought was interesting this year was, Jassy started talking quite a bit about the stuff I was just talking about, strategy and getting started and how to have a good experience in transformation. If you watched his keynote, the first 15 to 30 minutes was we talked about new EC2 instance types that we're sort of filling the holes and were designed to really meet all customers' compute needs. We talked about their new Graviton processors, and by all measures, like this stuff, well, their own processors is definitely an interesting component, but by all measures, this is kind of table stakes. But the reality is that's where most enterprises are, right? We talk to customers every single day about cloud transformation and how they're going to get to the cloud, and most CIOs and directors of technology, they're talking about compute, they're talking about EC2, they're talking about storage and potentially some database as a service, but they're not all out there talking about serverless and AI ML. Most of them are still trying to take a first step. And I thought it was interesting this year that sort of the AWS brass was playing to that audience a little bit more than they had in the past. So I feel like AWS is really embracing the customer in the enterprise at this point, which I think is a nice change. In terms of and AWS, one of the reasons that we chose AWS as a platform in the first place is we saw them as innovative, and there's certainly no lack of announcements around innovative services, things like SageMaker and the sort of higher level machine learning and AI tools like Recognition and Poly and Lex and all of that stuff. Those things are all great, but what I think you're seeing is there's just a ton of interest in that basic compute stuff that's going to help people start on that transformation journey in a more serious and earnest way.
Thanks, Brendan. I do want to bring in my co-host. I want to throw it to you, Sherbert, first. Obviously, organizations always find challenges moving to the cloud. What do you think? What are some of the challenges they're running into?
Well, that's actually a great question. We want to know. Curt and I wrote a book for CRC Press a while on cloud computing and the ubiquitous data center. The issue is there's still a lot of people getting ready to move to the cloud. You talk to customers. What are those pain points? What kinds of things do people really need to think about as they make the move to the cloud?
It's interesting. I don't quote me on the numbers, but I hear these questions and I get asked these questions from time to time about friction and what's holding people back, and I'm not sure anything is holding people back, right? Like I think the public cloud market, I saw this in Gartner the other day, in 2019 was somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 billion of spend, right? Like up from zero or virtually zero 10 years ago. So I don't know that there's that people are being held back. I think there's obviously still concerns around how to operate in a public cloud. I don't think there's tremendous concern about security anymore. I don't think there's tremendous concern about data privacy. I think where you see trepidation is that people just don't know how to necessarily operate efficiently in the cloud. But there's also a lot of horror stories about, oh my gosh, I went to AWS or I went to Azure because people told me I could save money, right? Well, you can, but not if you go in with a poor strategy, right? So I think these horror stories do give enterprise CIOs and decision makers some pause in running into that sort of wholesale public cloud transformation that we're talking about, and that's probably not a bad thing, to be honest with you, right? They kind of need to hear the horror stories so they don't have their own. But my guess is these days there's always going to be people that are concerned about security and privacy. But my guess is I think what we're seeing the most is people are concerned about, how do I operate efficiently? And how does this sort of fit in with my current model for technology and my current staffing for technology? And staffing really can't be understated, right? It's a tough market out there. Finding people with the right skill sets to build, deploy, and run these things is not simple. And we're a cloud company. We probably have a better time hiring than a lot of enterprises do, because this is what we do every single day. But it's still a challenge, and those skill sets are in high demand. So I think some of those things are potentially slowing down adoption. But I would still argue that adoption isn't really slow yet. We may not be seeing that wholesale move to public cloud, but most companies are doing something, and a lot of companies are doing quite a lot in the public cloud.
Brendan, I've got a question. As we look at the capabilities that you've been talking about and the way that companies are using them as they move to the cloud, do you see most of your customers following the capabilities to the cloud? In other words, looking at what you offer and saying, that's something we can use, so we'll move? Or are the companies at a point where they know they have to transform regardless, and they're looking for the cloud that will let them do what they have to do? Is it a push or a pull as they're looking at the capabilities that the cloud can provide?
That's an interesting question. And well, this probably sounds a little bit like a cop-out answer. I think it's a little bit of both, right? Let's be honest, for the vast amount of workloads out there, it doesn't really matter which public cloud provider you're choosing, right? They all cover the basics really, really well, like compute, storage, database as a service. What we find actually, where we really have the most success with our customers is if we start with the basics, show them small successes and build upon it, right? I think I said to you guys earlier, like, piecemealing your workload as you're transforming, on the move to public cloud, I don't think that's bad. I actually think it's really good, at least at the beginning, right? I don't think you can piecemeal strategy. I think you have to have a really clear and sound strategy. You have to understand governance and budgets and KPIs before you start. But where we see the most success and the customers that are actually utilizing the platforms to truly innovate are those customers who maybe start simple and start to build confidence and trust in these providers and trust in firms like ours that we're sort of capable of helping them sort of navigate this new world. But what we're seeing, again, I think all the providers can provide the basics, and most of the providers can provide a lot of really interesting, innovative tools too. But most of them are looking for to get started with something pretty simple and pretty basic to start, sort of really putting the foundations of a public computing or public cloud computing environment, sort of firmly in place within their businesses.
Brendan, thanks so much for being here. This time tends to fly on this show because we talk a lot about great things, but we do want to give you a chance to maybe tell the folks at home where they can go to learn more about ServerCentral Turing Group, a little bit more about some of the services, AWS, and topics of reInvent.
I think clearly for us, you can visit us at servercentral.com. Lots of good information there. We spend a lot of time on our website and in our social channels. So if you have interest in learning more about us, that's a great place to start. With regard to just the sort of bigger picture stuff, I could speak definitely with some authority about AWS because I've lived in that ecosystem for a long time, but AWS provides so much material, and I think that's partially because they embrace the self-service model in a lot of cases. So I'd encourage people who are interested that haven't really taken those first steps is go sign up for a free tier account, fire up an instance, and start playing around. And once you do, and you get access to the console, just the amount of services and things you can play with without spending a fortune, the documentation and the how-tos, everything is there, right? There's so much documentation out there. I spend time on SlideShare, looking at slide decks all the time, just sort of trying to absorb as much information as quickly as I can. I'm out at YouTube watching videos about Kubernetes and all sorts of stuff. So certainly no lack of publicly available free sort of information that people can grab a hold of and start learning and really start understanding these platforms.
Well, folks, you've done it again. You've sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 enterprise fan chatbots. But I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to my co-hosts, starting with our very own Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, we'd love to have you maybe tell us what you're going to what you're doing the next week, and of course, how can people get a hold of you and talk a little bit about what they want for show topics.
Well, on Twitter, I'm ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab, and I'd love to hear from you. Or you're more than welcome to drop me a line at Cheebert@twit.tv. I think it's probably better if you go to Twyat@twit.tv, and that'll hit all the hosts. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your show ideas. Life goes on. Anyway, we're doing all kinds of cool things. We're getting ready to drop another nearshore observatory into the water. And this is called Kilo Nalu, and we're actually going to have some cameras looking on the reef just outside Waikiki Beach.
Thank you, Cheeber. We also have to thank our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. People love reading your stuff, Curtis. Where can people find you and all of your work?
Well, as always, people can find my writing at Dark Reading, and especially at the edge of Dark Reading. Had some interesting stuff up this week. Got more coming next week, looking at things like best practices for securing S3 buckets. We've seen what happens when you can configure them badly. Here's how to configure them properly. And, of course, I'm getting ready for the RSA conference. Just me and 40,000 or so of my closest security buddies. If you're going to be out there, hit me up on direct message on Twitter. It's KG4GWA. And let me know. I'd love to see members of the Twyat Riot out there in the city by the bay.
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you guys for being here. I wouldn't want to do this show without you, definitely. Well, folks, we also have to thank you as well. You are that person who drops in each and every week to watch and to listen to this show to get your enterprise and IT goodness. We want to make it easy for you to watch and listen to the show and get your enterprise news. Go to our show page right now, twit.tv/Twyat. There you'll find all the amazing back episodes, the show notes, the co-host information, guest information, of course, all the links we do during the show. But more importantly, next to those videos, you actually get those really helpful download and subscribe links as well. Support the show by getting your audio version, your video version, your HD video version of your choice listed on any one of your devices or any one of your podcast applications that you use on your devices. It's really the best way to stay on top of your enterprise and IT news. So go ahead and subscribe. Now, after you subscribe, why don't you just impress your friends, your family, and your coworkers? Give the gift of Twiet by sharing Twiet with them. Remember, we also do this show live each and every week, 1:30 p.m. Pacific Fridays. We want to watch the show live, go to live.twit.tv. There you can see it, what we do behind the scenes, how the show is run, all the content. It's a lot of fun. If you're going to watch the show live, you might as well also jump into our chat room as well. Our chat room is live. We've got some really great characters there, irc.twit.tv. Go and jump in there and join the crowd, join the Twiet Riot, get some questions as part of the show, maybe add some content to the show. We definitely interact with them throughout the show. So be in there and watch the show live, and being part of the chat room is live as well. Also, if you can't watch the show live, you can't be in the chat room, you can also still join the community as well over at twit.community. There we have a 24/7 discussion. All the hosts are there. The Twit community is there. Some great discussions about content and the host, guests, discussion about technologies, of course, all about all of our shows as well. So come join the community at twit.community. Also remember, it's that time for the Twit's annual audience survey. We want to hear from you. It will only take you 5 minutes to get your voice heard. Please visit twit.to/survey20. That's twit.to/survey20, and let us know what you think. There's no sign-up form. We don't track you. Your feedback really helps us make Twit better. So just take that 5 minutes and go ahead and fill that out. Remember, you can always follow me at twitter.com/LeoMem. It's where I post all of my enterprise tidbits. And of course, I love to have conversations with people like you. Plus, I also post what I do during my normal work week at Microsoft. And of course, you could always go check out dev.office.com. There we post all the latest and greatest ways to customize your Office experience to make it more productive for your organization. Of course, also a little pitch from my side. My team is hiring, so go check out whether it's LinkedIn or whatever your hiring board for the Office platform. I'm looking for some senior devs, so if you're interested, come check that out as well. Also, I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week. We couldn't do this show without them, so thank you to them. I also want to thank all the engineers at Twit. And of course, I also want to thank Mr. Brian Chee, because he's not only our co-host, but he's also our tireless producer as well. He does all the bookings, the plannings for the show, and we really couldn't do the show without him. So thanks again, Cheebert. And of course, before we sign out, we have to thank our TD for today, Victor. Victor, thank you for being here as always. In the spirit of tradition, what was the main theme of today's show?
Well, I thought it was cool seeing the new projects Cheebert's working on, but I bet you those new projects won't have tissue paper security.
I think that's true. I would say super close, but I would say share Twiet with your Valentine. But good try. Maybe next time. Victor.
Yeah, I should have. Oh.
Thanks, Victor. Maybe next time. And until next time, I am Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on with the enterprise, just keep Twiet.